Welcome to rSlash where a victim sends his abusers to jail for over a decade. Background: this Prorevenge took place when I was in high school in the mid-2000s, a time in my country when there was much public outcry over bullying and hazing in boarding schools. A couple of students in different schools had died from injuries resulting from bullying. Other schools were rioting and burning stuff. They were under increased scrutiny. It was a whole thing. Personally, my life in high school was not fun. I was a fat boy with very low self-esteem going into my first year. The bullying I experienced quickly led to a depression. I was prone to self-harm and recklessness and a bit of suicidal ideation. The thing that made high school particularly nightmarish though was the sexual abuse. Low-key comments about my sexuality from this group of about 5 boys in 4th form. They called me and my best friends gay. The social stigma associated with homosexuality here is really extreme. These boys would stalk and terrorize me. They left threatening notes under my sheets. "We're going to F you up for being a effing gay. We're going to effing rape you," etc. So I had only one close friend who knew what was going on. Ironically, after an entire term of convincing everyone that I was gay, this same group began sexually abusing me. I'll spare you the details, but my first year in high school was the worst time of my life. But you're not here for my sad story, so moving on. Sometime in the middle of the term, the vice principal of our school was changed due to the aforementioned public backlash from the bullying scandals. The previous vice principal was a decent man, but the new VP was not. He came with a well-earned reputation of being unnecessarily harsh, dishing out suspensions and expulsions like candy on Halloween. The last straw. A few weeks after the new VP came in, and I'm having an incredibly sucky week that is really battering my mind. Yes, the bullying and sexual abuse was still going on. Now, every Friday night, a group of kids used to climb through a window into the computer lab and play video games. The windows had bars on them, but a slim person could fit through. I am not slim by any definition, unless the definition is fat. Among this group of kids was this troublemaker dude in my class and my dorm with the same common name. Turns out the VP had confused the two of us, and I was the one who was in his crosshairs. That Friday, the kids were caught. Some of them, including my namesake, managed to escape. The VP was called in, and the students who were caught snitched. Security was sent to the dorms to bring the other culprits. Cue me being woken up at 3 a.m. in the morning and dragged to the scene of the crime to endure a beating for something I hadn't done. Corporal punishment was technically legal then and now. My explanation that there is clearly no way for me to fit through the window were met with more canings. What really pissed me off was that the VP had us bring our belongings to his office at night for an inspection with the excuse of searching for stolen computer equipment. He came across my very private journal, and like the dick he was, he proceeded to ridicule me for having a diary in front of the teachers, watchmen, and the students I was bundled with. It didn't help matters that I broke down and cried in front of them. I don't think I have ever felt such humiliation in my life before. The following morning, we were suspended for 2 weeks. 2 weeks later, my parents took me back to the school. I had only told them of the mistaken identity that I suspected and the wrongful accusation. They already knew about the bullying. I didn't tell them about the VP going through my diary or the sexual stuff. I was still writhing in humiliation. The VP, being the absolute bunghole that he was, had convinced himself that I was the ringleader of this group of boys, again, mistaken identity, and thus deserved extra punishment. He ordered me to clear out a large patch of weeds and overgrown grass between the rugby pitch and the hockey field, about the size of a football field, using only a slasher. Just as I'm about to head out, it starts raining and it's the middle of July, so much cold. Temperatures regularly dip to below 10 degrees Celsius at night. So instead of going to the field, I head to class to wait out the rain. A few minutes later, the VP barged in furious, interrupting the geography lesson. He proceeded to tear me a new one, even mentioning my private journal, and then he threatened to expel me if I left the field before I finished my punishment. Mind you, this was one of the best schools in our region. It had actually been my first choice. He then proceeded to cane me again just to make his point stick. At this point, I just broke. All of this punishment was due to something I had not done. I was completely innocent, but this butt wipe just couldn't listen. The ridicule, the humiliation, the bullying, and the abuse all just came to a head at that point, and I decided to just F it all to heck. So I walked out into the rain, slasher in hand, with not even a sweater. This was about 4 in the afternoon. I never returned. I think the VP never really expected me to complete the punishment, but then I doubt he had ever met someone who decided they had no more Fs left to give either. My initial plan was to crucify him with his own words. Dusk fell with me cold and drenched, ripping up ferns from the ground. By midnight, I was shivering and crying uncontrollably, and it was too dark to see anything. I still persevered and started blindly cutting the grass, driven by this mad desire to just hurt. I really didn't care who I hurt. Sure, a part of my motivation was that if I did get sick out here, the VP would be in a truckload of trouble. But there was another part of me that was just like, F it, life sucks anyways. By midnight, I was too cold to continue. I ran out of energy and just sat down under a tree. Towards dawn, I was so cold from the rain and the wind that my shivers began reducing. It was impossible for me to sleep. The teachers finally found me there a couple of hours after dawn. Apparently, the teacher on duty had found my desk empty during morning study time between 4:30 and 6 a.m. When he asked where I was, it came about that I had not been in bed the previous night either. He then called the VP and other teachers who began searching the school, and they finally found me in the field. The Prorevenge, yay, it's finally here. I don't know much about what happened immediately after. I was so out of it. I do remember the teachers rushed me to the school nurse, who immediately recommended I be taken to the hospital. I spent a week there due to complications, pneumonia, and a very expensive week it was, all on the school's dime. My parents were pissed as anything, and I couldn't blame them. The school's board of governors convened after my parents contacted them. The day before my parents and I were called in to speak before the board, I had the idea to just face my fears and put everything out in the open. I was just done with the school and everybody there. So on that day, in front of a group of musty old men in the boardroom, I finally shed my burden. I told them everything, my only motivation being to bury the piece of poo vice principal and my tormentors. I don't think I've ever done anything that scary before. From the mistaken identity, the suspension, the punishment in the rain, the threat to expel me if I decided to seek shelter, and the crown jewel, the bullying and the sexual abuse, I laid it all out. I knew that would definitely get their attention. The board called my best friend, who backed me up. The VP was in no position to win a he said, they said contest with us at that moment. The VP was fired that day. A few days later, a zero tolerance policy on bullying was announced. I think the board was acutely afraid of finding themselves in the news for all the wrong reasons. They didn't want their school to be one of those schools, despite the fact that it was one of the worst. Over the holidays, my friends told me that things got really serious after that. People didn't know why, but suddenly any act of bullying was met with immediate and unconditional expulsion. As for the boys who had been terrorizing me, they were arrested. My dad went to the police with the threatening notes I had been receiving all year long. The school board supported us in this on the condition that we, my parents and I, do not take the story to the media. I was happy with that arrangement. I had no desire to be the face of male rape victims. We had a few meetings with an investigator from the public prosecutor's office. A couple of months later, the office reached out, told us that the boys had pled guilty. One of them got off scot-free because his dad was some senior army guy. Corruption, shaking my head. 3 of them got 10 years each. The last one got 18. The topping, they were all in their 4th and final year. They got arrested just as they were about to sit for their national exams and go to university. Their lives are ruined, and I have absolutely no remorse for them. This is normally the part in the video where I would crack a few jokes, but on a more serious note, guys, if you're being bullied or sexually abused in schools, or if you have suicidal thoughts, I really want to encourage you to reach out to someone in your school. Every school should have a counselor or a nurse or someone you could talk to. There are also hotlines that you can look up online if you want to talk to someone anonymously. The point is, you don't have to go through this alone. About a year and a half ago, I was having issues with both my MacBook and iPhone and went on to schedule a Genius Bar appointment. This used to be an easy task. You just went to the support site and scheduled one. But over time, Apple has foolishly attempted to reduce the load on the Genius Bars by putting up various roadblocks to getting an appointment. I assume Angela has just decided that this is cheaper than hiring more staff and that most of the customers are rabid enough to still buy Apple tech, despite the blow this causes to decent customer service. After finally jumping through a number of hoops to get a Genius Bar appointment, I'm prompted to enter my Apple ID and password. I'm told that since it's been 3 months, I need to change it for what is now probably the 10th time since having that Apple ID. I can continue to use it on the App Store and iCloud and such, but if you want a service appointment, I must change it. Having gone through this for the last several times to get an appointment, I finally hit my wit's end. Decided it's an unnecessary step to just get my product serviced and escalate the matter through the Better Business Bureau. Apple's initial response to the BBB is a form letter saying that I need to just change the password because it's in my best interest for security reasons, and that they won't make any exceptions. I respond again, indicating that this is bad customer service and incongruent with the Apple Credo, customer service principles, that all employees are trained in. Their next response was that Apple considers this matter closed. I hate that response. It's corporate speak for, "You're not worth our time anymore. Go away." The BBB closed the case shortly thereafter. I do some research and determined that through my Apple Care Plus policy that I was paying for on both devices, there was actually no catch-all clause for why Apple could refuse to service the device. There were several exclusions, but arbitrary account security requirements were not part of them. I file suit in small claims court for replacement value of the laptop and phone. Here's where things got interesting. I show up to the court date and the case is called. I come up to my podium and at the defendant's podium appears the manager from the store I used to work at. It was in the same county as the court, but significantly farther away than an Apple store that was actually a mile from the courthouse. I never confirmed this, but I think Apple didn't pay attention to the details of the complaint on the form, just did a name lookup and assumed that because I had previously worked at the store, that this was some employment dispute. The judge asks me to explain why I am suing, and in about a minute I'm able to concisely explain that Apple was putting up an unnecessary and extra contractual blockade to me getting a service appointment for my broken devices, so I was suing to replace the devices. The judge then turns to the store manager, who has arrived at court in a t-shirt and jeans. I'm in a full suit out of respect for the court, but before asking for Apple's side of the story, asks if the manager is a lawyer. The manager says he is not. The judge says that my state's laws require that only a chief executive or registered agent can represent a company in court, or they have to hire a lawyer to remove it to a higher district court. The manager responds that he understands, but that he's happy to set up a Genius Bar appointment right here, right now, at my convenience, to get the products repaired. The judge deems this reasonable. We agree on a time for me to come into my old store for service, and the case is continued for 2 weeks out on the chance that things don't work out. I attend my appointment and the technician is able to resolve all of my issues, and in addition, a senior Apple technician contacts me by email to indicate that he's overridden the password expiration requirement on my Apple ID, and I will never have to change it again. Cool deal, but I'm still out $60 for filing this court case to actually get things moving along. I appear for the continued court date, and the same manager appears again too. The docket is especially busy on this date, and we have a different judge who is slashing through cases, no nonsense. We're called and I indicate that while we were able to resolve the problems with my equipment since the original trial and am no longer seeking replacement value for my products, I should not have had to sue Apple to get this type of treatment that aligned with their contractual obligations to me as an Apple Care Plus customer, and believe that I should be awarded the $60 in court fees. The judge turns to the store manager and asks if he is a lawyer. Manager says no. Judge number 2 gives him the same spiel. Manager retorts that he still believes that the court fees shouldn't be Apple's responsibility because blah blah blah, and judge, pressed for time, turns to me and says, "I assume you don't want to have to come back here again for them to get a lawyer?" I say no, thinking that he's going to give me the full 60, but instead he says, "Okay then, you'll just split it so that we don't have to waste any more time on this. $30 to the plaintiff." According to my state's laws, a prevailing party gets all of their court costs. As such, I really disagree with the way the judge handled that, splitting it because he was in a hurry. I reached out to Apple's paralegal, who had emailed me right after the original trial to confirm that Genius Bar appointment, cite the relevant law, and say that the judge was pretty clearly in the wrong, and ask Apple to just cut me a check for the full $60. Otherwise, I'd have to appeal, which was an extra $125 they would surely lose, and then owe me $185. I was more or less appealing to their common sense. They didn't have any, responding that they would follow the court's judgment only and cut a check for $30. I think their pompousness continued in assuming that I was bluffing about the appeal. So I appealed. Since the small claims court is a subordinate of the district court, it actually got appealed to the highest court in the county, the circuit court. This is big boy court. No BSing. I appear for my court date, and again, the same manager shows up. Judge is a bouncy guy in a bow tie, clearly had his coffee, and is pleasant to everyone. I present my case, that the lower court only awarded me partial costs, and the state law required that I get the entire amount since judgment was entered in my favor. Judge turns to the manager. Are you a lawyer? He says no, but he has a letter from Apple's chief legal counsel saying that it's okay with them that the manager represents them. The judge does not like this, and his demeanor changes instantly. Apple does not decide what you can or cannot do in my courtroom. You need an attorney, so we'll probably need to continue this case. Judge turns to me. Do you object to a continuance for the defendant to get an attorney? I say, yes, I do, Your Honor, because they've actually been told 3 times now that they need to have a lawyer, and they keep disrespecting this court by sending the same layman to argue on their behalf. Judge turns to the manager, and with a sarcastic grin and obviously fake, "It's out of my hands," hand gesture says, "Sorry." Judgment is entered in my favor for $185. As if that wasn't good enough, after 30 days, Apple still hasn't paid. I reach out to the paralegal again, and they say that they are still looking into their options, as if they were going to appeal to the state Supreme Court, which had to have been done within those 30 days. Again, Apple thinks that they're too good to follow court instructions or do what's best for them. But they seem to have forgotten that I used to work from them. I have my credit union look up one of the old ACH transactions from my payroll, and I ask them what bank that was drafted from. They tell me Wachovia. I go back to court, file garnishment proceedings against Apple via Wachovia. I was able to skip the discovery portion since I already knew where they were keeping at least $185, and Wachovia, of course, cuts me a check within days. I love this story. It's so technical, but God, isn't it refreshing to see a little guy stand up to one of those giant billion-dollar corporations who doesn't care one bit about their customers and just stick it to them? Oh, that is satisfying to read. That was rSlash Prorevenge, and God, I love reading Prorevenge stories. It is by far my favorite subreddit. I'm curious how many of you didn't know this subreddit existed before you found my videos. I'm just curious how popular this subreddit is.